Isabella just wanted to get to work without being late again. But she stumbled on the escalator and ended up in the arms of an irresistibly attractive stranger. Little did she know she had fallen right into the lap of trouble. And the mall owner. Get comfortable because romance is in the air. Isabella had always believed that destiny had a peculiar sense of humor, but she never imagined it would be so literal as to make her literally stumble into love. It was a typical Monday at Elegance Mall, one of the city's most luxurious shopping centers. The shop windows gleamed under sophisticated lighting. The mirrored marble reflected every hurried step of the visitors, and the constant buzz created an urban symphony that Isabella knew by heart. She loved working there at Sublime Cosmetics, a store that sold the most coveted beauty products among the region's socialites. That morning, however, everything went wrong. The alarm didn't go off. The shower decided warm water was optional, and the bus was exactly 20 minutes late. When she finally reached the mall, Isabella was running as if her life depended on it. And considering her manager's mood when someone was late, maybe it did. Going up the escalator 2 steps at a time, balancing her bag on her shoulder and trying not to break her neck in high heels, she checked the watch on her wrist. 15 minutes late. She took a deep breath, speeding up even more. It was exactly at that moment that her left heel decided to betray her trust. The world seemed to slow down when her foot slipped on the metal step. Isabella felt her stomach lurch as her body tilted backward, her arms flailing in the air in a desperate attempt to regain balance. Her bag flew in one direction, the lipstick she was holding in another, and she was about to become intimately acquainted with the mall floor until firm arms wrapped around her. The world returned to normal speed, but now Isabella was suspended in the air, supported against a masculine chest that exuded an expensive and enveloping cologne. Her heart raced, partly from the shock, partly from the unexpected proximity of the man who had caught her. "Careful, princess," a deep, amused voice murmured near her ear. "Escalators can be treacherous." Isabella raised her eyes and almost lost her breath again. The man holding her had honey-brown eyes that seemed to guard dangerous secrets, dark hair slightly tousled on purpose, and a smile that managed to be both charming and irritatingly presumptuous. "I was perfectly fine, thank you," she replied, trying to compose herself and ignore the heat rising in her cheeks. "And I'm not your princess." He helped her balance on her own feet, but didn't step away immediately. For a few seconds that felt eternal. They stood there too close, staring at each other. Isabella could feel the warmth emanating from his body, could see the small laugh lines around his eyes that revealed someone accustomed to smiling. "Of course you're not," he agreed, his smile widening. "A princess wouldn't have all that attitude." "Attitude?" Isabella arched an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Sorry if I didn't melt into thanks for you doing what any decent person would do." "Any person?" He tilted his head, clearly amused. "Look around. How many other people rushed to save you?" Isabella glanced around quickly and noticed that indeed, several people had witnessed her near fall, but none had moved to help. This irritated her even more, not because they hadn't helped, but because he was right. "Maybe I didn't need to be saved," she retorted, picking up her bag from the floor and checking if nothing had broken. "Oh, of course," he said, leaning down to pick up the lipstick that had rolled a few meters ahead. "You were just testing the law of gravity." When he approached to return the lipstick, their fingers touched briefly. It was a simple contact, but it sent an electric current up Isabella's arm. She pulled her hand back quickly, pretending not to notice the spark. "Thank you," she murmured, putting the lipstick in her bag with more force than necessary. "You're welcome, rebellious princess." "Stop calling me that. How do you prefer? Damsel in distress? Beginning acrobat?" Despite herself, Isabella felt the corners of her mouth curve into a reluctant smile. There was something about him that was simultaneously exasperating and attractive. Very attractive. "I prefer Isabella," she said finally. "Isabella," he repeated as if he were trying out the name. "Beautiful. It suits you. And you are." For a moment she swore she saw something pass across his face. Hesitation? Amusement? But it was so quick she wasn't sure. "Someone who has good taste in recognizing an interesting woman," he replied, dodging the question with irritating elegance. Isabella rolled her eyes. What a cliched line. It didn't work at all. "Liar," he said, stepping closer. "You're smiling." And she was. Damn it. Isabella quickly recomposed her expression, trying to appear indifferent. "I need to go to work," she announced, taking a step back. "Thank you for the assistance." "It was a pleasure, Isabella," he said, and the way he pronounced her name did something strange to her stomach. I hope we meet again. In a mall this size, it's possible. Unlikely, she replied, already walking away. Never say never, he called after her. Destiny sometimes has a sense of humor. Isabella waved without turning around, trying to ignore the feeling that his eyes were still glued to her. Only when she reached the store and took refuge behind the counter did she allow herself to sigh deeply. You arrived just in time, commented Melissa, her co-worker. The manager came by looking for you 5 minutes ago. Great, Isabella murmured, still trying to process the encounter on the escalator. But tell me, Melissa approached curiously. I saw you talking to a hottie out there. Who was he? Nobody, Isabella replied too quickly. Just a guy who helped me when I stumbled. Oh, right. Melissa didn't seem convinced. And this nobody looked like what? Like trouble, Isabella sighed, organizing the products in the display case. But even while trying to concentrate on work, she couldn't get those honey brown eyes and that irritatingly confident smile out of her head. There was something about him that affected her in a way she couldn't explain. What she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, the mysterious stranger was standing in front of the store window, watching her work with a smile that promised much more than a simple casual encounter. The game was just beginning. 3 days had passed since the escalator incident, and Isabella was beginning to believe she had imagined all that electric chemistry. Maybe it was just the shock of the fall that had intensified everything. Maybe he was just another rich playboy who enjoyed flirting with mall employees. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon at Sublime Cosmetics. Business was slow, with only a few customers browsing the products without much interest. Isabella was organizing the new perfume releases in the display case when Melissa approached, nudging her with her elbow. Issa, there's a hottie entering the store, she whispered, pretending to arrange the lipsticks. And he's coming straight for you. Isabella raised her eyes and almost dropped the perfume bottle she was holding. There he was, walking through the store with the same irritating confidence as always, wearing a navy blue dress shirt that highlighted his eyes and dress pants that seemed to have been tailored specifically for his body. Good afternoon, he said, stopping in front of the counter with that smile she couldn't decipher whether it was charming or too provocative. Good afternoon, Isabella replied, trying to keep her voice professional. Can I help you with something? Actually, yes. He approached the counter, leaning casually against it. I'm looking for a gift. For your girlfriend? The question came out before she could control it, and Isabella mentally cursed herself. He arched an eyebrow, amused. What an interesting assumption. I don't have a girlfriend, he said after a strategic pause. And you? Isabella cleared her throat. We're not talking about me. Who is the gift for? For my sister. Her birthday is tomorrow, and I'm terrible at these things. How old is she? 25. More refined taste or basic? Refined, definitely refined, he replied. But his eyes didn't leave her face. She has good taste for everything. The way he said it made Isabella feel as if they were no longer talking about his sister. She forced herself to focus on work, walking to the imported perfume section. These here are the most sought after, she explained, picking up some bottles. They have floral, woody notes, or do you prefer something more citrusy? He approached to smell the perfumes, getting too close to Isabella. His masculine cologne enveloped her again, bringing back all the sensations from the escalator encounter. This one has an interesting aroma, he commented, holding the bottle she had sprayed on her own wrist for him to smell. But instead of smelling the perfume on the paper, he gently held her wrist, bringing his nose close to her skin. The touch was quick, but enough to make Isabella's heart race. Sweet, but with personality, he murmured, his eyes fixed on hers. Perfect. The perfume, she stammered, among other things. Melissa, who was watching everything from afar, disguised a giggle. Isabella stepped away, trying to regain her professional composure. So, will you take this one? She asked, wrapping the perfume more carefully than necessary. I will, he confirmed, taking his credit card from his wallet. And maybe you can help me with something else. What would that be? Do you know any good place to have lunch around here? I'm new to the area. Isabella observed him with skepticism. He didn't seem new anywhere. He had that confidence of someone who knew every corner of the mall. There's the Japanese restaurant on the 3rd floor. The Italian one on the 2nd is also good. And where do you have lunch? In the food court, like any normal employee. How about joining me at the Japanese restaurant? He suggested, signing the receipt. You could give me menu tips, since I'm new here. I work, she replied, but with less firmness than she intended. Everyone has a lunch break. I don't have lunch with clients. Then I'll have to stop being a client, he said, putting away his card. Problem solved. You're impossible. That's what they say, he smiled, taking the bag with the perfume. But I'm also persuasive. It won't work on me. We'll see. He headed toward the exit but stopped at the door and turned around. By the way, Isabella, her name sounded like a caress in his voice. I forgot to introduce myself last time. Ethan. Ethan, she repeated, liking how the name sounded. Pleasure to officially meet you. The pleasure was mine. His smile widened. See you later, rebellious princess. And he left, leaving Isabella standing behind the counter with flushed cheeks and a racing heart. Oh my God. Melissa approached as soon as he disappeared from sight. What chemistry? Who is this guy? He said his name is Ethan, Isabella murmured, still processing the conversation. And you're not going to accept the invitation? Are you crazy? He's gorgeous, charming, and clearly interested in you. Exactly why not? Guys like that aren't really interested in store employees. It must just be fun for him. And what's the problem? You can have fun too. Isabella shook her head, returning to organize the products. But for the rest of the afternoon, she couldn't concentrate on anything else. Every customer who entered the store made her heart jump, hoping it would be him again. The next day, Ethan appeared again, and the day after that too, always with a different excuse. He needed a gift for his secretary, wanted to try a new perfume, or simply passed by and decided to greet her. The visits became routine. He always arrived in the middle of the afternoon when business was calmer and stayed talking with her for 20-30 minutes. They talked about everything and nothing, movies, books, places they had traveled. He had intelligent humor, asked interesting questions, and seemed genuinely curious about her opinions. You're different, he said on a Thursday, leaning against the counter as usual. Different from what? From the women I know. Come on, how many do you know? The question came out with a more jealous tone than she intended. Many, he replied honestly, but none that make me want to invent excuses to buy lipstick. Isabella laughed despite herself. You bought 3 lipsticks this week. What do you need so much lipstick for? To have reasons to come here and talk to you. His honesty caught her off guard. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence, the tension growing between them like a rope about to snap. Why? She asked quietly. Because you intrigue me, he replied, leaning a little more over the counter. Because you don't get impressed easily. Because when you really smile, it seems like the world becomes more interesting. Isabella's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. There was sincerity in his voice that left her defenseless. Ethan, have dinner with me? He interrupted without apologies, without pretending it was work. Just you and me getting to know each other. Isabella looked into his eyes and saw something she didn't expect. Vulnerability. Beneath all that confidence, there was genuine hope that she would say yes. I don't know, she sighed. This could complicate things. The best things in life usually complicate everything. He smiled. It's worth the risk. The following week, Isabella found herself waiting for Ethan's visits with an anxiety she didn't want to admit. She had even started taking more care with her appearance. Not for him, of course, just because she was feeling more confident. At least that's what she told herself every morning while choosing her outfit more carefully than usual. It was a sunny Friday when Melissa arrived at work with that expression of someone who knew something nobody else knew. She barely greeted Isabella before planting herself in front of the counter, her eyes shining with contained curiosity. I need to tell you something, she said, looking around to make sure there were no customers nearby. If it's about Jorge from the perfumery asking for my number again, I already said I'm not interested. Isabella sighed, organizing the makeup brushes. No, it's not about Jorge. Melissa shook her head impatiently. It's about your mysterious heartthrob. Isabella stopped what she was doing. He's not my heartthrob yet. Melissa smiled. But listen to this. Yesterday I was leaving work when I saw him talking to the mall's general manager. You know that serious man who appears from time to check things? So what? Isabella tried to appear indifferent, but her heart was already racing. So what is that they weren't talking like customer and employee, Isa? They were talking like, I don't know, like equals. The manager even made a kind of formal bow when they said goodbye. A bow? Isabella frowned. You must have imagined it. I didn't imagine anything, Melissa insisted. I got curious and decided to investigate. You know Carla from the jewelry store? I do. Her mother has worked in mall administration for 15 years. Knows everyone who's important around here. Isabella felt a chill in her stomach. There was something in Melissa's tone that indicated this conversation wasn't going to end well. And what does this have to do with Ethan? I showed her a picture of him. Melissa pulled her phone from her bag. I managed to take this one from afar when he was leaving the store the day before yesterday. On the phone screen was a slightly blurry photo of Ethan walking through the mall corridor. Even with the poor quality of the image, it was unmistakably him. "Melissa, you can't go around taking pictures of customers," Isabella protested, but her voice came out weaker than intended. "Forget the photos now." Melissa waved her hand impatiently. Carla recognized him immediately. "Do you know who your mysterious lipstick buyer is?" The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Isabella could hear her own heart beating in her ears. "Ethan Blackwood," Melissa said finally, and the name came out like a bomb. "Son of Richard Blackwood, owner of this entire shopping mall chain, including this one here." Isabella's world seemed to tilt on its axis. She leaned against the counter to avoid losing balance, all the puzzle pieces fitting together at once. The excessive confidence, the expensive suits, the way he knew every corner of the mall, the way the manager treated him. "It can't be," she murmured. "It is. Yes," Melissa continued, clearly excited about the discovery. "The heir to the Blackwood Empire is hitting on you. Do you realize what this means?" "It means he's been lying to me this whole time," Isabella said, feeling a mixture of anger and humiliation burning in her chest. "Lying? Did he say he was poor?" "No, but—" She stopped, realizing that Ethan had never really lied about anything. He just hadn't told the whole truth. "He let me believe he was just another regular customer." "Maybe he wanted you to like him for who he is, not for the money," Melissa suggested. But Isabella wasn't listening. Her mind was racing, reviewing all the conversations they'd had, all the times he had flirted with her, all the moments when she had let her guard down. Was it all just fun for him? A game with the naive little employee? "Isa, are you okay?" Melissa asked, noticing her friend's pallor. "I'm great," she replied through gritted teeth. "Perfect. Look, I know it's a shock, but think about the bright side. He's rich, handsome, and clearly interested in you. It's not exactly a problem." "It is a problem," Isabella retorted, "because people like him don't really get interested in people like me. We're from different worlds." "But he doesn't know that yet," Melissa tried to argue. "Of course he knows," Isabella exploded, her voice coming out louder than intended. "He knows exactly who I am, where I work, how much I earn, while I knew nothing about him. This isn't a relationship, Melissa. It's him having fun at my expense." At that moment, as if the universe had perfect timing to make things worse, Ethan appeared at the store entrance. He wore a white dress shirt and dark pants, was even more handsome than usual, and brought that smile that used to make her melt and now only irritated her. "Good afternoon, ladies," he greeted, approaching the counter as he always did. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," Isabella replied with an icy voice, emphasizing the surname. His smile faltered. For a brief moment, she saw surprise and something that could be interpreted as guilt pass across his face. "So you found out," he said quietly. "I found out," she confirmed, crossing her arms. "Interesting how you forgot to mention that little detail about owning the place where I work." "Isabella, I can explain." "No need," she interrupted. "I understood perfectly. The rich guy having fun with the poor little employee. Very original." "It's nothing like that," he said, taking a step forward. "If you let me explain." "Explain what?" she asked, her voice loaded with hurt. "How you found it funny to see me stumbling in front of the mall that's yours. How it must have been hilarious to see me trying to impress a customer who, in reality, could fire me with a snap of his fingers." "I would never do that," he said, and there was an urgency in his voice she had never heard before. "No?" She laughed, but there was no humor in the laugh. "Then why didn't you tell me who you were from the beginning?" Ethan ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "Because every time people find out who I am, they change, become different, fake. They want things from me, not me. And with you?" He paused, searching for the right words. "With you it was different. You treated me like a normal person. You asked questions about me, not about what I own. You laughed at my bad jokes without forcing it. It was real." "Real?" She shook her head incredulously. "Nothing about this was real. It was all based on lies." "I didn't lie about anything I feel for you," he said, approaching closer. "Every conversation, every smile, every moment, all of that was true. But you lied about who you are. I omitted information. It's not the same thing." "For me it is," Isabella said, feeling tears threatening to appear. She wasn't going to cry in front of him, wasn't going to give him that satisfaction too. Melissa, who had followed the entire discussion in silence, decided to step away discreetly, pretending to organize products on the other side of the store. "Isabella, please." Ethan extended his hand as if to touch her, but she stepped away. "Let me take you to dinner today. We can talk about this properly." "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to have dinner with you. I don't want to talk to you. Actually, I don't want to see you in my store anymore." "Your store?" he asked, and there was a dangerous tone in his voice. "You know what I meant." "I do," he nodded slowly. "And you know I can be here whenever I want." "Of course you can," she agreed, raising her chin defiantly. "After all, you're the owner. But that doesn't mean I'm going to talk to you." They stared at each other for a long moment, the tension between them now of a completely different kind. It was no longer attraction and fun. It was hurt, wounded pride, and something neither wanted to name. "All right," Ethan said finally. "If that's how you want it to be." He turned to leave but stopped at the door. "Just so you know," he said without turning around, "I was going to tell you. Tonight at dinner, I was going to tell you everything." And then he left, leaving Isabella alone with a broken heart and an anger she didn't know exactly whom to direct at, whether at him for having omitted the truth, or at herself for having allowed herself to fall in love with someone who was clearly out of her reach. 5 days had passed since the argument in the store, and Isabella was beginning to wonder if she had overreacted. Not that she would admit this to anyone, especially to Melissa, who kept reminding her that she had dismissed the city's most coveted heir. "Are you crazy?" Melissa had said for the 10th time that week. "The richest and most handsome man in the mall was at your feet, and you expelled him because of what exactly? Because he didn't come and say, 'Hi, I'm a billionaire'?" "It wasn't because of that," Isabella shot back, but her conviction was diminishing with each day that passed without seeing him. Because, to her own surprise and irritation, Ethan had respected her request. He didn't appear in the store anymore, didn't casually pass through the corridor, didn't invent more excuses to buy products he clearly didn't need. He simply disappeared, and this was making her more irritated than when he insisted on appearing. That Wednesday, Isabella had one of the worst workdays of her life. It started with a hysterical customer because the lipstick shade wasn't exactly as she expected, went through an accidental spill of expensive foundation on the floor, and ended with the news that the store's sales were below the monthly target. "Everything will be fine," Melissa tried to console her as they closed the store. "Tomorrow is another day." "Easy to say," Isabella sighed, putting the key in her bag. "You don't have a manager breathing down your neck because of low sales." "Sales will improve, and who knows?" Melissa made a dramatic pause. "Maybe a special customer will appear who will buy everything in the store." "Stop daydreaming." Isabella rolled her eyes. "And stop talking about him. I already said I don't want to know about this subject anymore." They said goodbye in the parking lot, and Isabella walked alone to the bus stop. The mall was already closing, and the corridors echoed with the sound of her heels on the marble. It was a walk she had made for years, but that night, for some reason, it felt different. Maybe it was fatigue, or maybe it was the stupid longing that insisted on squeezing her chest every time she thought of honey brown eyes and cynical smiles. She was almost reaching the exit when she saw him. Ethan was leaning against the wall near the elevators, hands in his pants pockets, looking directly at her. He wore a dark gray dress shirt and jeans, a more casual combination than she was used to seeing him wear, but which made him even more attractive. Isabella stopped in the middle of the corridor, her heart racing. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension between them so palpable it seemed to occupy all the space around them. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm. "Waiting for you," he replied simply, pushing away from the wall and walking slowly toward her. "I said I didn't want to talk to you anymore." "You did," he agreed, stopping a few meters away. "But you didn't say I couldn't wait for you out here." "Technically, here inside is still yours," she pointed out, trying to maintain the sarcastic tone. "Technically," he admitted, and she saw a glimpse of the old smile. "But that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you?" Ethan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she had already learned he made when he was nervous or frustrated. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Because it's been 5 days since I've slept properly. Because I tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was better this way, but I can't." "Ethan, no. Let me talk," he interrupted, approaching one more step. "You were right to be angry with me. I should have told you who I was from the beginning, but you were also right about the reason why I didn't tell you." "What reason?" Because you're doing exactly what I feared you would do, he said, gesturing between the two of them. You're treating me like I'm a completely different person now that you know my last name. Because you are different, she exploded. You're rich, powerful, you can have any woman you want. Why the hell would you be interested in me? Because you make me laugh, he replied without hesitation. Because you're not afraid to contradict me. Because when you talk about things you like, your eyes shine in a way that leaves me breathless. Because you're intelligent, funny, and the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. Isabella felt her cheeks heat up but shook her head. You could say that to anyone. I could, he admitted, but I don't. And even if I did, it wouldn't be true like it is with you. He took another step, now close enough for her to feel the heat emanating from his body. Isabella, I know we're from different worlds. I know my family, my money, all of this complicates things. But what I feel for you has nothing to do with any of that. How can I be sure? She asked, and her voice came out more vulnerable than intended. Because if it were just fun, I would have given up 5 days ago, he said, slowly raising his hand to touch her face. Because if it were a game, I wouldn't be here begging you to give me a chance. The touch of his fingers on her cheek made Isabella close her eyes involuntarily. It was soft, almost reverent, as if she were made of something precious that could break. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. Then let me prove it, he said, approaching even closer. Let me show you that what I feel is real. When she opened her eyes, she found his fixed on her face, studying every detail as if he were memorizing it. There was something different there, no longer the arrogant confidence from before, but a vulnerability she had never seen. Ethan, he leaned slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Isabella didn't pull away. Instead, she raised her face toward his, closing her eyes when she felt his warm breath brush her lips. The kiss began soft, almost hesitant, like a question he was asking, but when she responded, pressing her lips against his, something exploded between them. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, while hers clung to his shirt like an anchor. The kiss deepened, 5 days of tension and longing materializing in that meeting of lips and tongues. Isabella had never been kissed like that, as if the world could end and that moment was the only thing that mattered. Ethan kissed her with an intensity that made her legs weak, one of his hands firm on her waist, the other still entwined in her hair. When they finally separated to breathe, they stayed with their foreheads touching, breathing heavily. The mall was silent around them, only the sound of both their accelerated breathing echoing in the empty corridor. Wow, she murmured, eyes still closed. Yeah, he agreed, his voice hoarse. Wow. They stayed like that for a long moment, absorbing what had happened. Isabella could feel his heart beating against her chest, could feel the masculine cologne that made her dizzy, could feel his hands trembling slightly where they touched her skin. Does this change anything? He asked quietly. Isabella opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an expression that mixed hope and fear. It changes everything, she admitted, and at the same time, it changes nothing. What does that mean? It means I'm still scared, she said honestly. It means I still don't know if this can work out, but it also means that... She paused, gathering courage. Maybe I want to find out. The smile that spread across his face was the most beautiful she had ever seen. It wasn't the confident and provocative smile from before, but something genuine and relieved. Can I take you home? He asked. Not in your expensive car, she said quickly. I'm not ready for all that ostentation yet. All right. He laughed. We can take a taxi or the bus if you prefer. You on the bus? She arched an eyebrow. That I need to see. For you I'd do anything, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip a beat. As they walked together toward the exit, Isabella knew she was getting into unknown territory. She didn't know if this would work out, didn't know if she could handle the complications that would come. But for the first time in 5 days, she felt alive again, and maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. 2 weeks had passed since that kiss in the mall corridor, and Isabella was living on an emotional roller coaster that she didn't know if she loved or hated. Ethan had kept his promise to take things slow. He didn't pressure her, didn't flaunt his wealth in front of her, and surprisingly, really did take the bus a few times to accompany her home. They met almost every day after work. Sometimes they just walked through the mall after the stores closed, talking about everything and nothing. Other times they went to a simple snack bar near her house, where Ethan seemed genuinely happy eating a common hamburger while she laughed at his clumsy attempts to eat without getting dirty. "Have you never eaten at a snack bar before?" she had asked on one of these occasions, watching him try to figure out the best way to approach the giant sandwich. "Not like this," he admitted. "It was always restaurants, waiters, cloth napkins." "What a sad life," she joked, wiping a drop of sauce from his chin with the paper napkin. The simple gesture had made his eyes darken in a way that made her stomach do somersaults. It was moments like these that made Isabella begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Ethan was making an effort to enter her world, and she was slowly lowering her defenses. But that Thursday, everything changed. Isabella was organizing the new products when she noticed strange movement outside the store. Several administration employees hurried through the corridor, talking quietly and with tense expressions. Even the general manager appeared, something that only happened when there were serious problems. "What do you think is happening?" Melissa asked, observing the commotion. "I have no idea," Isabella murmured, but felt a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. It was then that she saw him. Richard Blackwood walked through the corridor with the posture of an emperor inspecting his kingdom. Tall, imposing, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Isabella's annual salary. He radiated power and authority. Behind him, a small entourage of assistants tried to keep up with his firm pace. Isabella had never seen him in person, but there was no mistaking him. The resemblance to Ethan was undeniable. The same penetrating eyes, the same strong jawline. But where Ethan had warmth and humor, Richard had coldness and determination, and he was coming directly to her store. "My God," Melissa whispered. "It's Richard Blackwood. What does he want here?" Isabella didn't answer because her heart had stopped beating. There was something in the way he looked at the store, at her, that made all her instincts scream danger. Richard stopped at the entrance of Sublime Cosmetics, dismissed the assistants with a dry gesture, and entered. The space that always seemed adequate suddenly felt tiny with his presence. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "You must be Isabella." It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with knowledge and, by the tone, disapproval. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" "Actually, you can." He walked through the store as if evaluating every detail. "I'd like to have a private conversation with you about my son." Isabella's blood froze. Melissa mumbled some excuse and disappeared to the back of the store, leaving them alone. "I'm not sure what you mean," Isabella tried, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. Richard turned to face her, and the weight of his gaze was almost physical. "Don't insult me by pretending ignorance," he said calmly. "I know exactly what's happening between you and Ethan. The question is, do you?" "We're just friends," Isabella attempted. "Friends?" He arched an eyebrow in a way so similar to Ethan it was disturbing. "Friends who kiss in my mall after hours?" Isabella felt her cheeks heat up. Of course he knew. He probably had cameras in every corner of that place. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, my personal life is none of your business." "It becomes my business when it involves my son and an employee of my establishment," he retorted, his tone still controlled but with a coldness that made Isabella shiver. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I didn't say you did," Richard agreed, "but you're doing something imprudent for both of you." He walked to the counter, placed his hands on it, and leaned slightly toward her. It was a posture that should seem casual but was actually pure intimidation. "Let me be clear, Isabella. Ethan is an impressionable young man. He's always had a tendency to get involved with lost causes, impossible projects. It's a phase he needs to overcome." "A phase?" Anger began to bubble in her chest. "Is that how you see your own son?" "I see my son as someone who has responsibilities," Richard replied. "An empire to inherit, a family reputation to maintain, social expectations to fulfill. And I see you as a dangerous distraction from all of that." "Dangerous?" Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in the laugh. "You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you work in a cosmetics store, live in a rented apartment in the suburbs, take the bus to work. I know your family is lower middle class and you have no relevant social or business connections." Each word was a stab, not because they were lies, but because they were truths she had never felt ashamed of until that moment. "So what?" she asked, raising her chin defiantly. "So that doesn't match my son's world," Richard said. "Ethan needs to marry someone who can add value to our business, who understands the responsibilities that come with the Blackwood name. Someone from the same social circle. How convenient, Isabella said, her voice trembling with anger. Reducing love to a commercial transaction. Love? Richard laughed, and the sound was cutting. My dear, do you really think this is love? Ethan is 28 years old and has never had to fight for anything in his life. You represent something forbidden, a challenge, an adventure. But when the novelty wears off, you don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He straightened up.
Then tell me, has he taken you to meet anyone from the family? Have you gone together to any social events? Has he talked about introducing you to his friends, people from the same circle? Isabella opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out because he was right. Every time they met, it was just the two of them, always away from the places Ethan frequented, always in her world, never in his. I see you're beginning to understand, Richard said, noticing her hesitation. Ethan may even believe he feels something real for you, but unconsciously he knows this can't go beyond what it already is. That's why he keeps you hidden. He said he wants to take things slow, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Of course he did. Richard nodded. It's easier than admitting he doesn't have the courage to publicly assume a relationship he knows is inappropriate. Isabella felt tears stinging her eyes, but refused to shed them in front of that man. What do you want from me? For you to be smart, he replied. To stop this before you both get hurt even more. To allow my son to follow the path that was laid out for him. And if I refuse? Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Then you'll discover I can be very persuasive when necessary. This store, for example, has a lease contract that expires soon. It would be a shame if it weren't renewed due to administrative issues. The threat wasn't veiled. It was direct and clear. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering an opportunity for you to make the right decision on your own, he corrected. But yes, if necessary, I'll use all resources at my disposal to protect my son from a situation that can only end badly for everyone involved. Richard walked toward the exit but stopped at the door. Think about what we discussed, Isabella, and remember, the longer this goes on, the more painful the inevitable end will be. And then he left, leaving Isabella alone with a broken heart and the bitter feeling that maybe he was right about everything. Melissa appeared a few minutes later, finding her still standing behind the counter, staring into space. Isa, what did he want? To destroy my life, Isabella replied, and her voice sounded strangely calm. And I think he succeeded. That night, when Ethan appeared to pick her up, as he did every day, Isabella observed him with different eyes. She looked for signs of what Richard had said, the hesitation, the hidden shame, the awareness that this couldn't last, and the scariest thing of all was that she found them. For 3 days, Isabella avoided Ethan. It wasn't easy. He appeared at the store as he always did, but she hid in the back, asking Melissa to serve him. He sent messages asking if everything was okay, and she responded with vague excuses about being busy. He called a few times, and she simply didn't answer. But on the 3rd day, he didn't appear. And that's when Isabella realized that maybe Richard was right about more things than she wanted to admit. The next morning, a Friday, she was reorganizing the display products when she saw him approaching. But there was something different about him. Ethan walked with less confidence, his shoulders slightly hunched, and when he entered the store, he didn't bring that smile that always made her melt. We need to talk, he said without preambles. I'm working, she replied without looking at him. Isabella, please. There was something in his voice that made her finally face him. I know my father was here. Her blood froze. How do you know? Because he came to me afterward. Because he told me about your conversation. He ran his hand through his hair in a frustrated gesture. Because I should have imagined he would do this. Isabella dropped the product she was holding and turned completely toward him. And you came here to do what? Tell me he was right? That this was all a mistake from the beginning? No, Ethan replied firmly. I came to tell you he was wrong. About everything. Was he? She crossed her arms. Then why did you disappear for 3 days? Why didn't you look for me when you found out he had threatened me? Because... He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Isabella saw the confirmation of all her fears. Because you had doubts, she completed, her voice loaded with hurt. Because a part of you wondered if he wasn't right. That's not... It was, yes, she exploded, all the anger and frustration of the last few days overflowing. You disappeared because for the first time someone put into words what you already knew deep down. That this can't work, that we're from different worlds, that I don't fit into your life. Isabella, that's not true, isn't it? She laughed bitterly. Then tell me,
When were you going to introduce me to your family? When were we going to go out together somewhere your friends could see us? When were you going to stop hiding me like I was a dirty secret? Ethan looked like he had been slapped. For a long moment he was silent. And in that silence Isabella found all the answers she needed. That was it, wasn't it? She murmured, feeling tears threatening to fall. I was just an adventure, fun until you found someone suitable for your world. No, he said, taking a step toward her. It wasn't that. I wanted to protect you. Protect me? She shook her head incredulously. Protect me from what? From my world? From my family? From people who can be cruel and prejudiced? I wanted us to have time to solidify before facing all of that. How convenient, Isabella said, echoing the words she had used with Richard, using protection as an excuse for cowardice. The word hit Ethan like a slap. She saw the hurt pass across his face, followed by something that seemed to be a painful revelation. You're right, he said quietly. I am a coward. Ethan. No, he interrupted. You're right. I was scared. Scared of how my family would react. Scared of how this would affect business. Scared of... He paused. Scared you'd realize that maybe I'm not worth all the drama that comes with me. Isabella felt part of her anger dissipating, replaced by deep sadness. And now? She asked. What's changed? What changed is that I spent 3 days without you, and they were the worst 3 days of my life, he replied, approaching closer. What changed is that I realized I'd rather face my father, my family, the whole world, than lose you. Pretty words, she said, but her voice had lost part of its coldness. But what about when things get really difficult? When your father pushes harder? When you realize that choosing me means giving up everything you've always had? I won't give up everything, Ethan said, stopping right in front of her. I'll fight for what matters, and you matter, Isabella. More than any company, any inheritance, any expectation my father has. How can I trust that? In response, Ethan took his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. He put it on speaker before she could protest. Ethan, Richard's voice echoed through the small store space. I thought you were going to come to the office today so we could talk. I'm talking now, Dad, Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on Isabella's. And I want to make one thing very clear. Ethan, if this is about that girl, it's about Isabella, yes. The woman I love and intend to stay with, whether you like it or not. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Isabella felt her heart stop beating when he said he loved her. It was the first time he had used that word. Ethan, Richard's voice was dangerously calm. I think you'd better think carefully about what you're saying. I already thought about it, Ethan replied. I thought a lot, and my decision is this. Isabella is the woman I choose. If you can't accept that, then we'll have a problem. But I won't give her up. You're making a mistake that could cost you your inheritance, Richard threatened. Then let it cost, Ethan said without hesitation. I can build my own life, my own company. I can work for others, but I can't build another heart, another love like this. Isabella felt tears finally overflowing, but now they were tears of a completely different emotion. Ethan, Richard began, but was interrupted. The conversation is over, Dad, Ethan said firmly. When you're ready to really meet Isabella, to give her a real chance, let me know. Until then, I don't want to hear another word against her. And he hung up. The silence that followed was profound. Ethan and Isabella stared at each other, both breathing heavily, as if they had just emerged from a battle. You just defied your father, she said quietly. I did, he confirmed. Because of me. Because of us. He corrected. He could really take away your inheritance. He could, Ethan shrugged. But he can't take you away from me, unless you want to leave. Isabella observed him for a long moment. She saw determination in his face, but also vulnerability. He had put himself at risk for her, had chosen her over the easy life he had always had. You said you love me, she murmured. I did, he confirmed, taking a step closer. Because it's true. I love you, Isabella. I love your strength, your intelligence, your stubbornness. I love the way you challenge me, how you make me want to be a better person. I love how you make a snack bar hamburger seem like the best meal in the world just because you're with me. She laughed through her tears. I love you too, she finally admitted. Despite everything, despite the fears, despite your impossible father, I love you. Ethan smiled, and it was that genuine smile she had learned to love, free from all the arrogance of the early days. So it's decided, he said, extending his hand to her. Us against the world. Us against the world, she agreed, intertwining her fingers with his, including against my father. Especially against your father, she corrected, and they both laughed. But even as they laughed, Isabella knew the battle was just beginning. Richard Blackwood wasn't the type of man who would accept defeat easily, and Ethan had just declared war on his own father for her. She just hoped their love was strong enough to survive what was coming. Now, Ethan said, pulling her closer, I think I owe some official introductions. How about we start with a dinner where I take you to the best restaurant in the city, and we don't hide from anyone? As long as you don't get uncomfortable if I don't know which fork to use first, she joked. As long as you don't get uncomfortable if I still prefer the hamburger, he retorted. And they kissed right there in the middle of the store, not caring who might see. The war was declared, but at least now they were on the same side. 1 week had passed since the phone confrontation with Richard, and things had changed drastically. Ethan was no longer hiding. He appeared at the store every day, took Isabella to lunch at the mall's own restaurants, and they walked hand in hand through the corridors as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The gossip spread like wildfire. Employees whispered when they passed. Some customers looked with poorly disguised curiosity, and Isabella could feel the stares wherever they went. But Ethan seemed completely oblivious to it all, or simply didn't care. Doesn't it bother you? She asked on a Tuesday when they left the Japanese restaurant on the 3rd floor, and she noticed several people watching them. What? People looking? The comments? Ethan stopped in the middle of the corridor and pulled her closer, kissing her softly right there in front of everyone. Does it bother me now? He asked when they separated, a playful smile on his lips. Ethan, she protested, but was laughing. I want everyone to know you're mine, he said, intertwining her fingers with his. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud. And he really seemed to be. But Isabella still felt a knot in her stomach every time she thought about Richard and his threats. The man had been silent since the call, and that made her more nervous than if he were making a scene. He's planning something, she told Ethan that night as they walked to the bus stop. Who? Your father? This silence isn't normal. Men like him don't just accept defeats. Ethan sighed. Maybe he's reconsidering. Maybe he realized I was serious. Or maybe he's waiting for the right moment to strike. Isa, he stopped and turned to her. No matter what he does, I won't change my mind. And if he really cuts off your inheritance, if he disinherits you, then I'll work like any normal person. I have a degree in business administration. I have experience in the family business. I can start my own company, work for others. He shrugged. I won't starve. But you were born for that life. It's yours by right. What's mine by right is choosing who I want to spend my life with, he replied, touching her face. And I choose you. The following Thursday, Isabella was having one of the busiest days in weeks. A special promotion had attracted several customers, and she barely had time for lunch. She was finishing a sale when Melissa appeared by her side, discreetly nudging her. Isa, she whispered. Look who arrived. Isabella raised her eyes and felt her blood freeze. Richard Blackwood was standing at the store entrance, but this time he wasn't alone. An elegant woman, probably in her 50s, was beside him. She had perfectly arranged blonde hair, wore an expensive jacket and skirt set, and carried a handbag that cost more than Isabella earned in 6 months. Who is she? Melissa asked, but Isabella didn't need to ask. There was only one person it could be, Ethan's mother. Excuse me, Richard said, approaching the counter when Isabella finished serving the customer. I'd like to speak with you. This is my wife, Victoria. The woman extended her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pleasure, Isabella. I've heard a lot about you. Mrs. Blackwood, Isabella greeted, trying to keep her voice steady. Could we talk privately? Richard asked. Here is fine, Isabella replied. She wasn't going to be intimidated again. Victoria and Richard exchanged a glance. Very well, Victoria said. I came here because my husband told me about the situation between you and our son. What situation? The romantic involvement you're having, Victoria clarified as if talking about the weather. And I wanted to meet you personally before making any decisions. What kind of decisions? Whether I support my husband in his attempts to separate you or give you a chance to get to know you better. Isabella blinked, surprised. This wasn't what she expected. And what was your conclusion? Victoria studied her for a long moment. That you're exactly as Ethan described. Strong, intelligent, and not easily intimidated. He talked about me? At length, Richard interrupted, and there was a note of resignation in his voice. By phone, in person. He even sent a 3-page email explaining why he was in love with you, and why he thought we were wrong. 3 pages? Isabella couldn't hide her smile. 3 very eloquent pages, Victoria confirmed. Talking about your work ethic, your independence, your sense of humor, your honesty. It was quite embarrassing, actually. Embarrassing to see my son defend someone with such passion, Richard admitted. Isabella looked from one to the other, trying to understand where this conversation was leading. What do you want from me? We want to really get to know you, Victoria said, not as a threat or a problem to be solved, but as the woman who won our son's heart. Richard may have questionable methods. Victoria gave a meaningful look at her husband, but he only wants to protect Ethan, sometimes excessively. Sometimes, Richard murmured. Frequently, Victoria corrected, and I want to make sure we're not making a mistake by pushing away someone who could make our son happy. Before Isabella could respond, a commotion began outside the store. Several people were looking in the same direction, pointing and whispering. Even Victoria and Richard turned to see what was happening, and then Isabella saw him. Ethan was walking through the mall corridor carrying the biggest bouquet of red roses she had ever seen in her life. It wasn't just big, it was absolutely exaggerated, taking up almost all the space in his arms. Behind him, one employee carried a large box of chocolates, and another brought a giant teddy bear. What is he doing? She murmured, but part of her already knew. Ethan stopped right in front of the store, completely ignoring the crowd that had formed around him and his parents' presence. His eyes were fixed only on Isabella. "Isabella Santos," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want everyone in this mall to know that I am completely, hopelessly in love with you." "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked, but was laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm redeeming myself for being an idiot," he replied, entering the store with all the romantic paraphernalia. "I'm proving I'm not ashamed of you, that I don't want to hide you, that I want to shout to the whole world that you're the woman of my life." The store was now packed with curious onlookers. Mall employees, customers, and even some neighboring store owners had come to see the spectacle. "Isabella," he continued, placing the flowers on the counter, "I know I made mistakes. I know I took too long to have the courage to publicly assume what I feel, but I want to spend the rest of my life making up for it." "Ethan, let me finish," he interrupted, taking her hands. "I want to take you to meet all my friends. I want to introduce you at every social event, every business dinner, every family gathering. I want you to know every corner of my world because I want you to be part of it, not as a visitor, but as the owner." The crowd around was completely silent, absorbing every word. "And if your parents don't approve?" she asked, glancing quickly at Victoria and Richard. "Then they'll have to get used to it," Ethan replied without hesitation. "Because you're not going anywhere." It was then that Victoria stepped forward. "Actually," she said, her voice clear in the store's silence, "I think I'm already getting used to it." Ethan turned, surprised to see his parents there. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" "Meeting our future daughter-in-law," Victoria replied with a genuine smile. Ethan's jaw dropped. "Future daughter-in-law? Well," Richard cleared his throat, "if you're going to insist on marrying her anyway, I'd prefer it to be with our blessing." "Wait," Isabella intervened. "Nobody mentioned marriage here." Ethan turned to her with a smile that could light up the entire mall. "Not yet," he said. "But now that my parents approve," he knelt right there in the middle of the crowded store, taking a small box from his pocket. "Ethan," Isabella gasped. "Isabella Santos," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring that sparkled under the store lights. "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in all floors of this mall?" The crowd held its breath. Melissa was crying openly. Victoria had her hands on her chest. Even Richard seemed emotional. "You're crazy," Isabella said, smiling through her tears. "Completely," he confirmed. "Crazy about you." "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I accept." The mall exploded in applause when Ethan kissed her, still kneeling, with the ring shining on her finger. It was exaggerated, it was public, it was everything she thought she didn't want. And it was perfect. When they finally separated, Ethan stood up and pulled her into a hug that lifted her off the ground. "I love you," he murmured in her ear. "I love you too," she replied. "Even if you are completely dramatic." "I learned from the best," he laughed, and she knew he was referring to the fall on the escalator that had started it all. On the other side of the store, Victoria nudged her husband. "Admit it," she said. "You like her." Richard watched his son and future daughter-in-law, who were now laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I think I do." Some 2 weeks had passed since the most public marriage proposal in Elegance Mall's history. and Isabella was still getting used to the new reality. The ring on her finger caught the light with every movement, constantly reminding her that she wasn't dreaming. News of the engagement had spread like wildfire. Social newspapers published photos of the moment, calling it the romance of the century between different worlds. Social media buzzed with comments, some adorable, others not so much. But Isabella discovered she didn't care about others' opinions when she had Ethan by her side. "Nervous?" Melissa asked that Friday, adjusting an imaginary tie around her friend's neck. "Terrified," Isabella admitted. "It's Richard Blackwood. Even though he approved the engagement, he's still intimidating." Victoria had suggested a formal lunch to officially welcome Isabella into the family. It wasn't mandatory, but it was a Blackwood tradition, and Ethan had explained that it would be important to definitively seal his father's approval. "You'll be fine," Melissa encouraged her. "He already likes you, he just doesn't know it yet." The chosen restaurant was the most elegant in the city, the kind of place Isabella had never set foot in. When she arrived accompanied by Ethan, she was greeted by a maitre d' who practically bowed before them. "Reserved table for Mr. Blackwood," Ethan said, and they were immediately escorted to a private room. Richard and Victoria were already there, talking quietly. Richard wore an impeccable suit, and Victoria was stunning in a navy blue dress. When they saw Isabella enter, both stood up. "Isabella," Victoria smiled warmly, kissing her on both cheeks. "You look beautiful. Thank you for accepting our invitation," Richard said, and his formality was softer than the first time they met. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was polite and superficial. They talked about the weather, the restaurant, general comments about the mall. Isabella gradually began to relax, realizing that Richard wasn't trying to test or intimidate her. It was when the main course arrived that the conversation took a more personal turn. "Tell me about your family," Richard said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "My parents live in the countryside," Isabella replied. "My father works in a factory. My mother is a teacher. I have a younger sister who's in nursing school." "And how did they react to the engagement?" Isabella smiled, remembering the call she had made the day after the proposal. "My mother cried. My father was suspicious and wants to meet Ethan personally for a little chat. My sister said I caught the prince charming and now she'll have to settle for a commoner." Victoria laughed and even Richard sketched a smile. "I'd like to meet them," Victoria said. "Maybe we could organize a dinner." "They'd be honored," Isabella replied, "and probably too nervous to eat. Like you were today," Ethan joked, and she gave him a discreet elbow. "And your plans for the future?" Richard asked. "Do you intend to continue working?" "Of course," Isabella replied without hesitation. "I love my job. I like having my independence. Even being the wife of a Blackwood, especially being the wife of a Blackwood," she replied, and saw approval pass through his eyes. "And if there are conflicts between your career and the family's social obligations, then we'll talk and find a balance," she said. "I don't intend to become a trophy wife, but I also understand that marrying Ethan means accepting certain responsibilities." Richard nodded slowly. "You know," he said, putting down his utensils, "when Ethan first told me about you, I thought it was just a phase, a young rebel's whim." "Richard," Victoria murmured in a warning tone. "No, let me speak," he continued. "I was wrong. Completely wrong." Isabella blinked, surprised. "I was," he confirmed. "I spent the last few weeks watching my son, and you know what I saw? I saw a man who found his purpose, someone who's motivated, happy, determined, something I hadn't seen in him for years." "Dad," Ethan said quietly. "And you?" Richard turned to Isabella. "Didn't just win his heart, you won his respect, and that's rare." "Mr. Blackwood." "Richard," he corrected, "and I want to apologize for the way I treated you the first time we met, for the threats, the blackmail. It was inappropriate and unfair. You were protecting your son," Isabella said diplomatically. "I was trying to control my son," he corrected. "There's a difference. And I realized I don't need to protect him from you. I need to thank you for appearing in his life." Victoria was smiling proudly at her husband, and Ethan seemed to be trying not to cry. "So," Richard continued, "I'd like to formally withdraw all objections to your relationship and give my official blessing to the marriage." "Thank you," Isabella said, feeling enormous relief. "That means a lot to me." "And to me?" Richard raised his wine glass. "A toast to Isabella, who managed to do something that neither I nor Victoria could do in years, make our son truly smile." Everyone raised their glasses, and Isabella felt intense emotion taking hold of her. She had found not only the love of her life, but a family that, despite initial setbacks, was willing to accept her. Now, Victoria said after they toasted, we need to talk about the wedding. When are you thinking of having the ceremony? We haven't decided yet, Ethan replied.
And where? Richard asked. I can suggest some places. Actually, Isabella interrupted, a crazy idea passing through her head. I already know where I want it to be. Where? Everyone asked at the same time. At the mall, she said, and saw surprised expressions around the table. That's where we met. That's where it all began. At the mall? Victoria repeated, as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. Why not? Ethan said, his eyes shining. We could decorate the central atrium, use the escalator as, I don't know, an alternative altar? You two are crazy, Richard said, but laughing. Completely crazy. Yeah, Isabella agreed, but that's how we like it. A few hours later, they said goodbye outside the restaurant. Victoria hugged Isabella warmly, whispering in her ear that she was happy to gain a daughter. Richard, surprisingly, also hugged her, saying he was looking forward to meeting her parents. Shall we take a walk through the mall? Ethan suggested when they were alone. To celebrate. Let's, she agreed. They walked hand in hand through the familiar corridors, watching the stores that were already closing. It was strange to think about how everything had changed since that first day when she had stumbled on the escalator. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked. About how life is funny, she replied. If I hadn't been late that day, if I hadn't run up the escalator, if I hadn't stumbled. But you stumbled, he interrupted, and fell into my arms. Literally. And you never let me go. And I never will. They stopped exactly where it all began. The escalator was empty, the mall lights creating an almost magical atmosphere. You know, Ethan said, a mischievous expression on his face. I have an idea. What kind of idea? She asked suspiciously. How about we recreate our first meeting? Ethan, no. But he was already going up the escalator, gesturing for her to follow. Come on, he shouted. Pretend you're late for work. You're impossible, she shouted back but started going up behind him. Now stumble, he instructed when she got close to the top. I'm not going to stumble on purpose. That's ridiculous. Then I'll catch you anyway, he said, extending his arms. And that's exactly what he did. When she reached the top of the escalator, Ethan pulled her into his arms, making her laugh as he spun her around. Careful, princess, he said, echoing the first words he had said to her. Escalators can be treacherous. I'm not your princess, she replied, reciting her own line. Of course you are, he corrected, kissing her softly. You're my queen. As they kissed at the top of the escalator, surrounded by the twinkling lights of the empty mall, Isabella thought about how perfect it was that everything had started there, because that place that used to be just her workplace was now where her new life had begun. I love you, she murmured against his lips. I love you more, he replied. Impossible. Probable. Ethan? Thank you for catching me when I fell. Thank you for stumbling, he replied. Best thing that ever happened in my life. And there in the mall, where they met, where they worked, where they would get married, Isabella and Ethan laughed together, knowing that no matter how many floors life had, they would climb them all side by side. Love had conquered all floors, exactly as it should always be. The end. And so we conclude another story. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next romances. And for me to know you made it this far, comment a little flower or star in the comments below. I'd love to know who followed this story to the end. Thank you very much for your time. God bless, and see you next time.